Hello everybody and welcome back to another Blender Made Easy tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at the render engine Workbench in Blender 2.8, and this render engine is not used for rendering, it's mostly used for just sculpting, modeling, and seeing how your viewport looks. But there are a couple of cool things that you can do with this render engine to get some interesting results. You can access the render engine by coming over to this panel right here and changing the render engine from Cycles or Eevee over to Workbench. Once you do that, you can see that there are a lot of different options to change how the viewport looks. Currently though, with this basic scene with just the cube, we won't be able to see too much, so let's go ahead and switch to a more complex scene to really show what these features do. Here we are in a kitchen scene that I recently created, and if you want to see what this scene looks like when it's fully rendered, go over to my Instagram and you can check that out. Now let's get into the settings of Workbench and really see what we can do. The first panel that we have here is the render settings and samples. You can see that the render sample is currently set to 8 and the viewport is currently set to single pass anti-aliasing. Now what anti-aliasing is, if I zoom in here a little bit, you'll notice that the edges of our cabinets right here, you can see that they're a little bit jagged and it's not smooth. Now that is what anti-aliasing does. If we were to set up the sample numbers over here, we can see that the lines become smooth. Currently though, if we set this to, let's say, 16 samples, nothing really happens. You can see they're still the exact same. I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, but what I found out what you need to do to change it in the viewport is go up to Edit, down to Preferences, and then setting the viewport from single pass anti-aliasing up to like 16 or 32 samples. Once you set it up to 32, you'll notice that your edges of your cabinets are a lot more smooth. If we were to render this at a 32 samples, let's go ahead and set that to 32 and then press F12. What this will do is it will take what your viewport looks like and just render that out into an image, and here we can see it. If I were to zoom in on the cabinets a little bit, you can see that the edges right here are really smooth, and that is what the 32 samples does. If we were to set this to, let's go ahead and go to slot 2, then go back and set this to no anti-aliasing, and then if we press F12 again, you can see the edges on this render are a lot more low res and they're kind of pixelated. But if I go to slot 1, you'll notice it's a lot more smooth, and this is on 32 samples and this is on no samples at all. Underneath the sampling, we have the lighting settings. Here is where you can change the direction of the light in your viewport. You can add shadows and matte caps or change the whole thing to flat. Right now we are on studio lighting, and if we change this, you'll notice nothing is happening. That's because we need to go into rendered view. So press Z and go over into rendered view. Now if we click on here, we can change to the different presets. Some of these look pretty good and you can change them to whatever you want. Underneath that, we have the rotation. So if we click on this little button, we can change the rotation of the world settings right here. You can see the lighting is going around our scene just like that. To the right of the studio, we have the matte caps, and most everybody is familiar with using matte caps. You can see there's a ton of different presets here. I can change them to whatever I want. If I want a red clay looking matte cap, I can change that. If I want a glossy one, I can go ahead and switch to this red one right here. There's a lot of different presets, and here is where you change them. Keep in mind you will have to be in rendered view. If you're in solid view, this matte cap will not apply, so make sure you press Z and go into rendered view. Next to that, we have the flat, and here there is no lighting and no shadows in the scene. It's just what the objects look like. So if I move around, you can see we have the bread, the wine cabinet, and a couple other things, but it's difficult to see because there is no lighting in the scene. Moving on from there, we have the color. Here is where we can set the color of our objects. We can set it to a single color, so if you want everything in your scene to be a single color, you can do that here. And then here is where you can set the color. You can set it to whatever color that you like. If you want a blue color, light blue, somewhere around there. And if you press F12, this will render out into an image and we can see what it looks like. There we go, you can see the edges of our cabinets are nice and smooth and everything has that blue color. We also have the object, and here is where we can set the color of individual objects. Currently though, in my scene, there is no objects with a different color. If you want to change one, just go ahead and select an object. Underneath the object data panel, underneath the viewport, here is where you set that color. So let's say I want this stovetop to have a blue color, and I want this cabinet to have like a red color or something like that. I can change it just like that. And then if we were to render this, it'll take those colors into account and then render them with the appropriate colors, just like that. We also have the random option, and this will take every object in your scene and give it a random color. This is useful if you can't find a certain object or you're trying to select something and it's selecting the wrong object. This could be useful if you're wanting to do that. We also have the vertex right here. What this will do is it will take the vertex colors that you've created and then render those into the viewport. So for example, if I select this countertop right here and then I go into vertex mode, coming up here, select vertex paint, and then I can right click, set it to like a green color. If I start painting, you'll see that it renders those vertex colors that I just painted. Once we do that and we press F12, it'll render that out into an image as well. You can see over here, we have that green color. And finally, we have the texture. If we switch over to that, you can see that it enables the textures that we've added to our scene. Keep in mind, this will display the texture at the scale that is in the UV image editor. So if you have your texture at the base size and you use a texture coordinate node to set the scale, it won't take that into account. It will only take into account the size of the UV map. So keep that in mind when you render in this mode. And underneath the color, we have the options to set the shadows. The first option here is backface culling. What this will do is it will take the back faces of your object and then make them transparent. I turn that on, you can see the floor now disappears, but if I look underneath the floor, you can see it's still there. That is what backface culling does. It takes the inside faces of your mesh and then makes them invisible, but the outside is still visible when you look at it. We also have X-ray, which enables us to see through our mesh just a little bit. Currently though, we can't see anything, and that is because we need to press F12, render out an image, and then we will be able to see that almost everything in our scene has a little bit of transparency. And underneath that, we have the shadow. I turn this on, you can see it adds a little bit of shadow to our scene, and I can play around with this value. I can turn it up or down to whatever I want. And then also we have cavity underneath that, and here is where we get into the fun stuff. We can set the ridge amount. You can see here what that does. It just enables us to see the ridges of our mesh. Or if you want to see the valleys of your mesh and add in some ambient occlusion, you can turn that up as well. I'll set both of these to a little bit higher, somewhere around there. And then if I press F12, it'll render out into an image and actually look pretty good. We also have depth of field. So if I turn this on and select the camera, go over to the camera settings, I can mess with the depth of field and it will also display that in the viewport. If I turn this up, you can see it becomes blurry, and currently we're focused on this vase. So if I turn this really low, you can see the background has become blurry, the foreground also is blurry, but that vase is still in focus. What the outline does is it will take your mesh and add a small outline to the edges of it. So if I turn this on and I zoom in a little bit, if we look at one of these leaves, you'll notice that there's a small outline just right there, and it'll be easier to see if I change this to like a blue color or something like that. There you can really see what this does. If I zoom out, you can see everything has a blue outline, and it makes it look pretty interesting. And then underneath the film, we have an option to turn on transparency. So if we can see our background in the viewport, that part of our render will be transparent. It's just pretty self-explanatory. That option is right there if you need it. And finally, we have the color management. Here is where we can set the look. If we want to have high contrast in our scene, I go high contrast. You can see what that does. You can play around with the exposure, with the gamma. All the options are here just like they are in Eevee or Cycles. Okay, so now that we've messed with all of the settings, let's go ahead and hit F12 and render out an image and see what this looks like. And there we go, we can see our image. This rendered in 2 seconds, as you can see up top here, and I think that looks pretty good. You can use this as a clay render if you just want to display what your model looks like, or if you want to just render out your viewport, you can go ahead and do that in Workbench. So if you have ever wanted to render out your viewport, you can now do that in the new render engine, Workbench. Thank you for watching. If you learned something new or created your own clay, quote-unquote clay render, I would love to see it, so make sure to send it to me over on Instagram at BlenderMadeEasy. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.